Let's begin with some thoughts about what we're going to do together over these 3 sessions. Well, as you know, there was pre reading for today from my book, Public Speaking: The Path to Success. Today, we're going to focus on the 3 ways to make your audience pay attention. Often, we have important messages that are important to us, but we want to show our audience that's also important to them. And so, we're going to talk about some concrete strategies to get our audience to look up from their phones, look away from their email, and pay attention to us. Next week, we'll turn to the science of persuasion and talk about what it takes to craft a perfect pitch. And we'll there learn about a 5-step sequence, 5-step process called Monroe's motivated sequence. And then finally, 2 weeks from now, we'll conclude our session on advanced public speaking techniques, looking particularly at some of my own ideas and some recent research on the art of inspiration. Now more than ever, we need inspiring leaders. And so we're going to turn to what it takes to inspire and mobilize others and look at some of the advanced techniques that I use with politicians and CEOs and other business leaders to help them articulate their messages clearly and convincingly. There is a recommended text for this 3-course series. We'll be pulling on my text, Public Speaking: The Path to Success. But whether you buy the book or not, I'm just delighted that you're all here and am excited to engage with you today on 3 ways to make your audience pay attention. Well, let's begin, if I can, with a look at today's agenda. So we're going to cover, as you might imagine, 3 subtopics today. There are 3 ways after all. We're going to first look at projecting confidence. Second, we're going to look at eliminating those pesky filler words from our vocabularies, well, you know, like, and so. And then we're going to talk about making your presentation all about the audience. Let's start with projecting confidence. So here's our first discussion question. Why do we fear public speaking? Why do you think we're afraid of public speaking in the first place? And so when we're on stage, or right now, I and all of us are on the Zoom stage, we want to turn and look at genetics or biology as a primary reason. That is, some of us are more predisposed than others to fear public speaking. Some of us are more extroverted. Some of us are more introverted. And for those of us who are introverted, I am an extroverted introvert. I play extrovert on TV, but I have a kinship with my fellow introverts here. I recommend a wonderful book by Susan Cain, Cain, called Quiet. And her book, she writes about being introverted in an extroverted world. But Susan's work and many others talk about this genetic or biological piece. There's little we can do to change our genetic predispositions. Where we can, however, make an impact is in that second main reason, negative thoughts, that we're all worried about what might happen, but likely won't happen while we are speaking. That uncertainty piece overwhelms us and is one of the primary drivers that we can control to help us speak more confidently. And so when I work with clients, I'm always thinking about what are some of the things that they're worried about. When we get those on paper, we talk about them so that once we know specifically what folks are worried about, we can focus there. And instead of saying, I'm afraid of public speaking, we could say instead, I'm nervous about these 2 things. And we can narrow down our efforts to be much more effective. So now that we know how to fear public, or rather why we fear public speaking, let's look at some specific strategies that we can use to overcome those fears. And so writing down our fears in itself is a nice exercise to help us push through. A second possibility is to stand like a superhero. A lot of talk from Amy Cuddy. She popularized this idea in her now famous TED Talk, one of the top 10 TED Talks of all times, talking about the power of standing like Superman or Superwoman, and how standing like that for a period of 2 minutes before a high stakes situation can sometimes people self-report feeling more confident. We're going to try this together now. I'd like everyone to stand up if you wouldn't mind. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put our feet about shoulder lengths apart, put our legs about shoulder length apart, and we're going to put our hand on our hips. All right. Shoulders back and head held high. This is called a power pose. And so Cuddy and others have written about the idea that if you stand like this for a period of 2 minutes before an important speech or presentation, before a high stakes interview, before an important meeting, you may feel more confident, that this high power position can lead to feelings of confidence and comfort. That's the power pose. You may now sit down. And so you might try that power pose. I really like that one. Now, there are some, I do want to add here a little footnote to this research, that there are some questions in terms of whether there really is a statistically significant difference in people's cortisol and adrenaline levels when you stand like this. It's a high power position, but you think to yourself, I've got this, I'm going to rock it, I'm going to do well. We call that positive self-talk. And so positive self-talk is an important dimension of feeling more confident. We, as I like to say, we flood our brain with positive messages. We flood our brain with positive messages. And that same technique, by the way, is used in athletics. It's called the replacement method. And the replacement method is commonly used, let's say, after a tough half, a tough midway point in a game or a match, where the coach say, all right, I know we had a tough first quarter or first half, and they give a little speech trying to replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts. This is often used by psychologists to help us avert difficult or negative messages. So it really works. And I will add that despite those statistically significant questions, whether there is that effect on cortisol and adrenaline levels, I still teach power posing because many people self-report feeling more confident when they use this method. So if it works for you, feel free to use it. The third technique is about using relaxation techniques. Now, there are many different breathing exercises that are research-based that can help us feel more confident. I want to teach one in particular that we're going to try right now, called 4-7-8. All right, here's what we're going to do. Everyone sit up in your chair. Put your feet either on the ground or as close to the ground as you can get them in a comfortable position. And we're going to dispel, or we're going to get all the breath out. And then we're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 7, and exhale slowly for 8. All right, everyone, first exhale. All right, breathe in for 4. Ready? Hold. Exhale slowly. All right, we're going to try it again. This time we're going to close our eyes. Close your eyes so you have some privacy. All right, now first get rid of all the breath. Ready? So you're empty. Now breathe in for 4. Hold your breath for 7. Exhale slowly for 8. That's 4-7-8. It's a really nice technique, especially if you're nervous, but it also works wonderfully as a stress reliever. Some people even use it to try to get to bed at night. But no matter how you use it, it's a wonderful breathing exercise that basically creates and alleviates tension. That's the idea behind that exercise, and is one that a lot of students and executives that I've worked with have found helpful. Well, the last technique is to practice your presentation in the place where you're going to present. And so practicing on Zoom with nobody there, just you and the camera, and practicing it the way you might do it live is a wonderful way as well. Certainly when we were in person, I recommended going to the room where you were going to present when no one is there, or going to a similar space. But nowadays on Zoom, just getting comfortable with this platform, whether it's with you and a friend or just you solo, can be a wonderful way to overcome that fear. And you don't have to practice the whole thing. Just practicing the beginning and the end are among the most important parts. The beginning is important because of a technique called primacy. Primacy, the idea that audiences tend to remember and put a lot of weight onto what they hear first. And then practicing the end is important due to a phenomenon called recency. Recency, the idea that audiences tend to remember or put a lot of weight onto what they hear last. So I recommend 3 ways to end a presentation effectively. One is with an action, telling the audience specifically what you want them to do now. Sometimes there is no action, so instead you want to end with a challenge, and you want to challenge your audience to do something great or bigger than themselves. And finally, a nice way to end is to end where you started. We call this closing the loop. Closing the loop is ending where you started. So if you started with a story about a little girl who you met on your travels to Zimbabwe, come back to the story about the little girl that you met on your travels. If you began with a powerful statistic, come back to that statistic. That's called closing the loop. Michelle asks, what's your advice in reducing feelings of imposter syndrome? Gosh, Michelle, I remember when I started my career 12 years ago. I've been a professor now for 12 years. The first class I ever taught was just outside Harvard Yard in the Science Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was in my 20s then. I was so nervous. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, gosh, I was at this preeminent university, and here was little old me and all these adult students. I've always been in adult education my whole career, so I've only taught undergrads for a short time. At the business school, we only have graduate students. And in that moment, I said, are they going to take me seriously? And once I began and started to share my knowledge, those feelings went away. So imposter syndrome often stems from the same feelings that we have when it comes to that fear of public speaking, that uncertainty, and just practicing your ideas, practicing aloud. That's the key. And I want to write that in the chat box. Practicing aloud is key to overcoming that imposter syndrome. Not memorizing, not speaking to ourselves, but practicing aloud, much like I did and still do often, is the key to being much more fluid and successful when we're delivering in public, whether on Zoom or in person. Thank you so much, Michelle, for that question. All right, so let's move to our second topic, which is filler words. What filler word do you use the most? It may or may not be on screen. Well, interestingly, let's talk a little bit about the research on filler words. So first, everybody uses them. It is not just a Western phenomenon. We see them all over the world. For instance, in Hispanic and Latino cultures, you hear eh. Eh is a very popular filler word. Certainly, if you look in Asia and Chinese culture, for instance, you might hear mm. And so no matter where we are, filler words are pervasive. We all use them. There are 3 main causes of filler words. And might I add, filler words are just a category of what we call speech disfluencies. So speech disfluencies includes things like stuttering, for instance, or repeating a word. So I might be talking and then repeat some of the words I just said. That's another form of speech disfluency. But we're focused just on filler words today, which is one of the branches of speech disfluencies, because we're focused on public speaking. So certainly divided attention is a main cause. Let's say you're speaking and you hear a noise. You hear some drilling outside. Someone walks into your room. That divided attention can cause an Secondly, infrequent word use. When we try to use a word we're not that comfortable with. I remember when I was in English class back in high school, I learned this cool new word called juxtaposition. And so feeling all proud of myself, I walked into English class the next day and I say, well, Mrs. Winrow, I like how the author juxtaposed the light and dark imagery in that poem. I'm still not sure what juxtaposition fully means, but I do really appreciate and love that word. So when we use words that we're not comfortable with, we tend to say, And then finally, of course, that nervousness. We all get nervous, yours truly included. And nervousness, one of the most common ways to use, or one of the most common causes, rather, of filler words. So these are the places, of course, that some of our fighting strategies are going to come in handy. Interestingly, research suggests that credibility decreases as filler word use increases. It's almost an inverse relationship. And so this is the main reason I'm anti filler word. And I remember I had a debate. This was, let's say, I think last year on NBC with a colleague of mine from the UK. And we were arguing about whether filler words are okay. And where we ended up in that debate was that filler words are probably okay in informal speech, in everyday speech. But when it comes to formal presentations, that's where we want to get rid of these pesky things because our credibility decreases as our filler word use increases. And then finally, it's more difficult for people to listen and understand what we're saying if we use filler words. And that's why we want to get rid of these things from our vocabulary so audiences can focus instead on our verbal message and not get caught or stuck with the ums and ahs coming out of our mouths every few moments. So with that in mind, let's talk now about some strategies to get rid of filler words, and then I'll answer any questions that you may have. All right, so the first strategy that works really well is practice. Now, there was a question in the chat box that came up about how and how often to practice. So you want to practice until you've nailed three main parts of your presentation: the opening, any complex parts, and the closing. It's not realistic to practice every word 50 times. It's just not. We're too busy. I don't do it. And I imagine you don't have time to do it either, especially let's say if it's a longer 15-minute presentation. By the way, your presentation should never be longer than 15 or 20 minutes. If you are invited to give an hour-long talk, you want to give a 15 or 20-minute presentation and then go into some kind of case or exercise and then potentially bring people back for some more discussion, followed by Q&A. But the days of hour-long presentations are over. I would never subject my students to that, and I would never subject you to that either, simply because attention spans, research suggests, only last between 7 and 20 minutes. That's it. That is the range. And after 20 minutes tops, your audience is simply not listening to you anymore. And so we have to find ways to engage people. And practice is such a critical part of that so that we stay within time. So we've already talked about the power of practicing your opening. And you might remember that's due to a phenomenon called primacy. We also want to practice any complex parts. Complex parts are any parts of our presentation that are difficult for us to discuss, maybe complex charts or graphs, maybe difficult to explain sections, maybe advanced or difficult science or research-based pieces of our presentation. We want to practice those because if we can articulate them clearly, the audience is impressed with us. And so those are certainly important. And then Pavel's question on the closing, making sure that we practice our ending due to a phenomenon you might recall called recency. Recency, the opposite of primacy, the idea that audiences tend to put a lot of weight onto what they hear last. So if there's any part of our presentations to practice, it's these three sections. Another technique that we can try is pausing. The best antidote to is the pause. We can't say if we're not speaking. And there are two particular places that we want to pause. And I call these, from my own research, filler word hotspots. I play on the medical term there. Hotspots are the two places in speech where we're most likely to say And those places are at the beginning, like when I call on you. We're most likely to say when we're first beginning to speak. And in between ideas. That is when we're transitioning from idea 1 to idea 2. Like right there. Right when I'm transitioning, that's where we want to pause so that we're less likely to say or another filler word. That helps us overcome these filler word hotspots. And then finally, asking for feedback. Sometimes we're not aware we're using filler words. So hearing ourselves use them or having someone point them out or clap is a wonderful, helpful technique. One study suggested that humans use filler words about once every 4.4 seconds. And just to bring together this module to a close, filler words are pesky, but there are, as we talked about, some concrete strategies to get rid of them. And while clapping may not be realistic in the real world, asking for feedback is key. And so hearing ourselves use them makes us aware that they're coming up and helps us be able to overcome them. It's a conditioning that needs to take place. So when I call on you, I actually don't want you to speak. I want you to pause for a moment or two to think about what you want to say and then speak. That does two things. One, it helps you avoid the filler word, but second, it shows respect to the questioner, that you're taking her or his question seriously. And so we've been conditioned from an early age, from when our parents or whomever raised us called on us, said, honey, or called us by our name. Yes, yes, yes. Just like our grade school teachers. And so we don't allow ourselves to think about what we wanted to say. We just speak. And so that's where those ums come from. And so we have to recondition ourselves to pause so that we can be much more fluid. Silence is a powerful public speaking tool. In fact, as you see me using it right now, a longer pause in speech we call a pregnant pause. That's what it's called in speech, this longer pause. Because when someone pauses, it's a great way to gain attention. Why isn't she speaking? Why isn't he speaking? And so we look up. And it's almost a reset button. You see politicians or executives use this strategy when they're asked a question that can be uncomfortable. They pause, maybe flash a smile or a grin. And it's a great way to take back control of an otherwise controversial or difficult situation. So pauses have a variety of purposes, and when deployed powerfully, they can give us a strategic advantage. Well, let's move on now and look at our last topic today, which is making your audience care. So just because we care about a topic doesn't mean our audience cares about that topic. We have to make them care by using some important strategies. And the first thing to know about making our audience care is that we want to consider the idea of with it. With it. With it is the idea. I'm going to type it in the chat box. With it stands for what's in it for them. The audience, yes, we want to make it all about them. So it's never about us, it's always about them. And if there's any aha from this session together today, it's that nobody cares. You don't care what I'm talking about. Nobody cares about what the speaker talks about unless it's relevant to them. So we've got to get out of this headspace of just sharing information because we think it's important. We have to make it all about the audience. And that's the secret sauce. That's the key to being successful. And if we do that, I promise you, we're going to be a lot more successful. Let's look at some specific strategies that we can use to do this. So one way to make the with it explicit is to use inclusive pronouns. And you may have seen me using this strategy throughout today's session. I'm not saying what you need to do. I'm talking about what we can do to make our audience care about our message. So instead, using pronouns like we, our, and us instead of you and your can be a powerful way to make the audience care. Listen to these two sentences. Jean, you must solve this problem. Jean, we must solve this problem. What's the difference there between sentence one and sentence two? How do they make you feel? Now, of course, there are times you need to say you, like during a performance review, you wouldn't say, now what we need to do is improve our performance in these three areas, right? Not really realistic. That's not going to work there. But certainly when we're trying to bring people into the conversation and engage them, we, our, and us are powerful pronouns. Another thing we can do is reference the present. Talk about what's happening right now. Connect the topic of our speech to what people are currently thinking about. We want to connect what they're worried about, what they're thinking about, with what we're discussing. Very important link that needs to be made, and I call that technique referencing the present. Finally, one more thing we can do is be explicit about the benefits of participating. Just because we think something is important and that the benefits are clear doesn't mean that the audience thinks it's important. And if we don't tell them specifically what they get out of participating, then they may not realize those benefits. It's not that humans are bad people or selfish. It's just that we're busy and we've got a lot going on. So we've got to make the benefits explicit. We have to make the with it explicit. As you may have figured out from my earlier story, I started my career at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I was always bothered by the fact that just outside Harvard Yard, in one of the richest cities in the world, there were many, many homeless individuals. And I would walk past these men and women every day on my way to Harvard Yard. And it was uncomfortable. It didn't sit well with me. And so I began volunteering at the Harvard Square homeless shelter. And I would go to the homeless shelter and I would help serve meals to many of these men and women in our community. And after a while, I wanted to get some of my friends to come with me, some of my friends and colleagues to join me at the Harvard Square homeless shelter. And so I developed a little script that I would use to help folks to come. And this is an excerpt from that script that's up on your screen. And I'd like you to take a look at this, and then we're going to talk about the specific benefits. I would say something like, I hope you'll join me tomorrow at 11 a.m. to prepare lunch for some of the homeless people in our community. It's a perfect opportunity for us to get to know one another better and to do something that will make us feel really good about ourselves. And I'm sure we'll laugh a lot as we figure out how to run the kitchen. Not only that, but there's always some food left over. And so you get a free bite to eat as well. So you can see here that being explicit about the benefits is an important step to making it all about the audience. Just because we think our audience knows the benefits doesn't mean that they do, or that they interpret it as the same way, in the same way that we do. Well, one last thing that I want us to think about today when it comes to making our audience care that I think is important is building virtual connections. And I just want to share this infographic. I put this on LinkedIn just recently, but there are three specific strategies I want to highlight, especially in this new Zoom world. The first is that we want to look at the camera and not the screen. That eyeball, that camera is our best way of making eye contact. And so sticking a little photo of a pet, of our best friend, of our partner, spouse, or significant other is a wonderful way to remind ourselves to talk to that camera and not the screen. And you can even talk to the first row of Zoom boxes. That is good too. But look what happens when I look at the screen. See how I'm looking down? So it doesn't look like from your end, I'm making eye contact with you. But when I look up at the screen, or rather at the camera, it looks more like I'm making eye contact. So that's really important to remember in our virtual environment, to look at the top row of Zoom boxes or put that sticky picture of someone or something you care about to remind you to talk to the camera and not the screen. The second strategy you want to try is speak a little louder. A recent article that came out in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology talks about the power or the idea that when we speak louder virtually, makes us sound more persuasive. Not just that, but varying your vocal variety. So sometimes you might notice I get a little quieter, and sometimes I get a little louder. Varying our vocalics also leads to a sense of more persuasiveness. And then finally, asking specific questions instead of asking, how are you doing? Or how was your weekend? A better way to engage people is, what filler word do you use most often? Or what are you specifically afraid of when it comes to public speaking? So when we ask specific questions, people feel more engaged. And whether we do so one-on-one or via the chat box, it's a wonderful way to build virtual connections. So I hope we'll try some of these strategies the next time that we are leading a Zoom call or a Zoom discussion. And John mentions in the chat box, in your With It discussion, you didn't really touch upon storytelling, though you employed it when talking about your days at Harvard. How important is storytelling in public speaking? Yeah, John, you caught me red-handed. Storytelling is a very important technique in public speaking. Interestingly, a journal article, it's a little dated now, but it suggested that just using an anecdote, a short story, at the beginning of your speech increases audience retention and interest, even if the story has nothing to do with your topic. Isn't that interesting? Even if it has nothing to do with your topic, just using a story increases the audience's interest and retention. So that's why I am a big proponent of using stories and how they are helpful and powerful in a variety of public speaking situations. In fact, I just wrote an article on this very topic. I'm going to share it with you in the chat box. Here it is. It just was published in Toastmasters magazine. For those of you not familiar, Toastmasters is the largest worldwide speaking organization, and they have a wonderful magazine. And my article just came out this month. In fact, I talked about the power of storytelling to supercharge sales and how you can use storytelling in a sales environment, virtual sales environment, or in-person sales environment. And you'll find the link in the chat box. But whether you use it for sales or not, there are a variety of ways to tell better stories. Stan asks, what was my biggest frustration when having to shift to Zoom? Stan, not being able to shake people's hands and give them high fives. I do miss that. But I'm very much, I'll share something though that might be relevant to everybody. You know, one advanced technique that I use, especially for people who are nervous, it's called warming up the audience. It's where you come up and you have short conversations with people in the front row or sitting nearby so that you kind of have some friends in the audience. So if you get a little nervous, you can just make eye contact and you'll get nods of approval or support from the people you talked to at the beginning before you began. So I do miss that. And I try to replicate that in the chat box. Well, folks, it's about 1 p.m. Eastern, and I'm so sorry we're just about out of time today, but I want to tell you what's coming up. So next week, we are going to focus on the art and science of persuasion. And we're going to build on what we learned today and talk about how to craft the perfect pitch. And so whether you're in sales or not, we pitch ideas all the time. We pitch proposals all the time. And so I want to teach you how to structure those ideas. We're going to move, today was more about delivery. And next week, we're going to turn to structure and look how to structure some of those arguments and proposals to be more compelling. There is a pre-reading, as there was for today, Monroe's Motivated Sequence, Perfecting the Call to Action. I'd also invite you to follow me on LinkedIn. I post about once every week or so some communication tips and tricks. And so I would invite you to follow me so you could get access to those techniques, but also because I want to learn about you and I love to see what you're posting. And so if you're active on LinkedIn, I would love to learn more, and I will comment and like and engage with you as well so that we can build a bit more of a community. It was a delight to have you all here. To be among Hopkins alumni is always a special honor. And so I look forward to seeing you all right here next week. Bye-bye, everybody.